We are going to be talking about literacy today, but before we start our official program, I'd like to take a couple minutes to talk to you about the Alliance and how the 40 Top series came to be. So the Alliance is a higher education collaborative made up of 10 colleges and universities in Southern West Virginia. So you see a map, we represent about 30,000 students. We have a footprint of 21 counties. We are project-based and results-driven. And you see the list of our colleges and institutions that are participating in the Alliance. Next slide, please. So our current projects of the Alliance is we have this 40 Top virtual roundtable series. It's 15 weeks of programming. We have nearly 1,200 people have participated in these sessions since April. We started this virtual roundtable series to give us a platform for communication and to help facilitate connections between West Virginia leaders and West Virginia residents. And we have covered a slew of topics ranging from voting changes during COVID to food supply chains to early literacy today. The Alliance is also the chief planner of the Small Communities Big Solutions Conference. It's November 16th through the 19th. This is a chance, we're going virtual this year in 2020. We have more than 80 national and state speakers, workshops, networking, tons of giveaways. To learn more about this conference, please visit wvsolutions.net. There are limited tickets available, and we expect them to go quickly. We also the statewide West Virginia Solution Seekers Student Leadership Conference. This is the first year for this. Many of you are educators on the line. If you have high school students, college students, friends that are educators of these students, please help us spread the word. We have 100 students currently registered for this conference. It's a statewide conference. You can also learn more at wvsolutions.net. And Maggie put that link directly into the chat session so that you had it. The Alliance hosts a small business leaders annual survey. We're working on that right now. We're going live next month, and we will have the results early in 2021. We have 4 working groups: entrepreneurship, tourism, workforce development, addiction recovery, and reentry. And we have the Collegiate Recovery Network in West Virginia under the Alliance, and we are proud to say that we're working with 9 institutions across higher education institutions across the state, hosting peer recovery support specialists on these campuses. And then lastly, our presidents meet regularly. So again, here's Small Communities. You can use the QR code and learn more about it. Next slide. And here's our Student Leadership Conference. Brad D. Smith, the Executive Chairman and former President and CEO of Intuit, will be our guest speaker. We also have a powerful lineup of professionals. And really the goal for this conference is to convince and encourage students to stay in West Virginia and show how they can be successful and write their own story right here in West Virginia. High school students are free because of a partnership of the West Virginia Department of Education. They are sponsoring all high school juniors and seniors. Next slide, please. Today's sponsor is Appalachian Power, and they are so supportive of the Alliance and our programs, and we sincerely thank them for their support of literacy. And they have a wonderful program online on YouTube. You can scan the QR code. Maggie will also put the direct link in their YouTube page, or YouTube channel, I should say, in the chat. Please check it out. It's tons of books, material located there. It's pretty inspirational. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can join the conversation today. We have a live poll. If you want to participate, you simply go to pollev.com/Sarah Payne 475. That's my poll. There's 5 questions, and I will give you highlights during the final Q&A portion of today's program. Next slide. We would be remiss if we didn't thank today's partners, and we've had great working relationships, both with the Benedum Foundation and the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative. And we really appreciate their support. This is like the 3rd or 4th one of 40 Top series that we have participated in and partnered on. So we sincerely thank both of these organizations. Okay, so we're going to get started today, and it's my privilege to hand the keys over today in the driver's seat to our official moderator of today's session, West Virginia Public Education Collaborative Executive Director, Donna Perduto. Donna is a wonderful friend. She is a great collaborator, and she's a true educator. Very passionate about education. With that, I'll give it to Donna.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm certainly delighted to be here today. And like you said, this is our 3rd or 4th go around. And I really have to compliment you and the Alliance for coming up with the idea of the 40 Top Roundtables, because it's been such an important online forum for all of our state during a time when we're really missing interaction with one another and the stimulation of meaningful. So thank you for that and letting us be a part of it. Just to say a little word about West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, our mission, we're statewide, and our mission is to connect K-12 and higher ed. And we're composed of 14 member partners, and many of them, including one of our co-chairs, Scott Roetruck, are here today watching this. So we appreciate that. Really want to second the thank you to the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation for their commitment. Their leadership has been committed to support the growth of early literacy in our state, and Jim DeNova's here to speak about that soon. We're honored to be collaborating with Benedum and the West Virginia Department of Ed on an opportunity for each of you and others that couldn't join us to apply for a grant award related to early literacy. And you'll hear much more about this later in our panel. Well, I'd like to show a couple slides now, just to set the stage for what you'll hear today. We all realize that this is a particularly crucial period when increasing early literacy achievement is not only important, but necessary. And this is going to require a deep commitment over time with all stakeholders, including those of us on this Zoom, on this Teams call, educators, policymakers, business sector, parents, and community members. And if you look at the slide here, you'll feel the same sense of urgency that we have. This is the 2019 National Assessment of Education Progress, NAEP, also known as the Nation's Report Card. And it shows the scores of reading tests in the United States and West Virginia. You can see the orange being the national and the gold being West Virginia. And the national bears some improvement too. If you look at it, only 35% of the students show proficiency on this particular assessment. And then you look at West Virginia and you see that only 30% showed in our state. So thus, you know, one of the reasons why we wanted to focus on literacy along with Benedum. Now, the next slide that we have shows, it's really interesting, I think, because it's our state during school year 2019, our state assessments. And you can see up close what third grade literacy looks like across the districts. And these slides will be available to you after this. Sarah will make them available, but you can kind of see the dark being above 50% proficiency, and then the white, you know, less than 25%. So it gives you kind of an up close third grade literacy across districts. On the next slide, you can see it even closer, because even though you see the black where some are above 50%, you notice the little dots inside that are color coded that represent the schools in that district. So there's variation within there. And that's really helpful to us as we look to hone in on what would be the areas, geographic areas that we would want to pinpoint to assist. Well, when you look at these things and you see the need, we know for sure that significant improvement is necessary. But we're so fortunate to have many dedicated professionals and stakeholders who are committed to turning around this early literacy gap, as well as minimizing the achievement gap for all students. And we're very fortunate that this panel is stacked with those kinds of people that are there to support. So you'll meet all the panel as we go along, but I want to start with our keynote in Mark Harshman. He's internationally recognized author and poet, and he's been really fun to get to know as we've been planning for this. And I'll tell you some of the hidden secrets about him at the end. But we call him West Virginian. He is our West Virginia Poet Laureate since 2012, and he lives here now in Moundsville, West Virginia. But he grew up in farm country of Indiana, and he attended Bethany College in 1969, and I think that's for sure when he fell in love with West Virginia. So he has degrees from Bethany College, Yale Divinity School, and the University of Pittsburgh. And he's the author of 14 children's books. And these, when I was a classroom teacher, we delighted in sharing his books with students. And many of our students had 6 or 7 of the books at the time. He has one book in particular, The Storm, that was a Smithsonian notable book. And he also has 8 collections of poetry. So that's exciting. And I did find a blog where people were back and forth talking about how wonderful he is. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind is they said his poetry has been described as sounding and feeling as if Robert Frost and Walt Whitman took a hike together through the Appalachians. I thought that was well said and really shows his love for Appalachian and, in everything that he does. And I said, I got to know him just a little bit, and he told me, I said, give me a good story that I can tell people that's not on your official bio. And when he told me, I actually thought that he was joking, but he wasn't. He had a great story about how he was personally taught to play chords on his guitar by his high school classmate in Indiana. And I think when I say his name, some of you may know him, Rick Derringer. He went on to write the hit song Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, and he became a Grammy Award-winning producer and writer of several hit songs. So we not only have an author and a poet, but we also have an accomplished musician in Mark. And then he told me, too, that he had teamed up not too long ago to go to Wales, which reminded him so much of West Virginia. And he had a fun gig there with Doug Van Gundy, a champion fiddler. And Mark was in charge of reading poems and telling stories while Doug fiddled away. So he has really propensity for having a good time, and we appreciate him being with us. And Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your insights. Mark, we saw you a minute ago.
So Mark, you are muted. This is Sarah. So you're muted, so you should be able to see your screen. There's a toolbar that
I've done it. Am I there now?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm sorry. I thought that was taken care of. Thanks to Donna. Thanks to Maggie for helping out earlier, and for Sarah for hosting today. Quickly, I live in Wheeling, not Moundsville any longer, but yes, the Northern Panhandle for many, many, many years. And I'm a terrible guitarist. Rick Zeringer, as he was then, would smile, but I can only do a few chords for Kumbaya. So what an amazing opportunity the Benedum Foundation is offering here. It's an opportunity I'll let others explain in more detail. I think my main purpose today is to remind us why we want and need to do this, to remind our hearts why we will do all we can to spark new and continued growth in literacy here in West Virginia. I think I'm here to tell stories today, if you will, though not so much my book stories, but my own story. When I think of early literacy, though, I must say that it is quite simply, before I go any further, it is transformational, life-changing, much in the way that life and goodness are. Of course, ideally, a loving parent will include in their love this nurturing of a love of language, both the listening and the eventual reading and writing of it. My wife had a dangerous emergency cesarean delivery for our daughter, Sarah. And I was pretty shell-shocked as my wife lingered in ICU. And I remember standing a ward away, holding our little daughter in my arms, but soothing to me, and I trust to her, I was telling her as much as I could recall of the various Beatrix Potter stories, starting with Peter Rabbit. It starts then. As far as the real impact of early literacy, well, I begin nearly all of my talks as a writer, whether with children or adults, by offering the testimony of my own childhood, how my parents, though neither of them were educated beyond high school, they were absolutely devoted to telling me stories, reading to me, and taking me to the library. As I say to children, when I find my hosts have displayed my many children's books and poetry collections behind me, and some days, when that happens, I will get on my knees in front of them. I don't care how many, 100 or 1,000. I will get on my knees and say very seriously and sincerely that those books behind me would not be there were it not for something that had happened to me when I was their age. For it was when I was their age that I fell in love with books, with reading and writing, and it has made all the difference. Has allowed me to travel from a small farm in Indiana to New York City and LA, across the ocean to London and Reykjavik and Copenhagen, to meet all kinds of interesting and famous people, all because of books, of literacy. Reflecting on that childhood, how words allowed me to discover my world, my greater self, how do I understand that mystery? I only know that it was made easier because I was raised on books and stories. A very lucky boy I was. The once-a-week trip to town from the farm for groceries always included as well a trip to the Carnegie Library. My earliest clear memory of home was of mother in one chair, father in another, a stack of books at their elbows. I recall, too, the great good fortune of hearing my father recite poetry to me. James Whitcomb Riley, little orphan Annie's come to our house to stay, to wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth that goes on. To this day, I'm enchanted by dialect, by real voices informed by local culture. I believe that had I not had such a language-rich extended household as I did, I would never have gone on to write a single published word. I was sick a lot too. No blessing then, but looking back, I think perhaps it was. John McGarren, the great Irish novelist, has written that there are no days more full in childhood than those days that are not lived at all, those days lost inside a favorite book. And I realize now that I had many such lost days as a child, and they planted in their own way the seeds for my future. And one other influence, besides my parents and that good fortune, bad fortune of being sick, my grandparents, their supper table there, how when the dishes were read up, we would continue to sit there for what seemed to me hours at a time. This was before TV, and the stories would just flow. Now, if you'd ask grandma or grandpa, they would say, storytelling, what's that? It was gossip to many of us, but they were the rich reminiscences of the old ones mixing in with today's gossip and news, whose cows were down sick, how great granddad had once shot a wildcat in that woods behind that very house where we sat at that very table, about Wednesday night prayer meeting, about grandma's killing of a giant black snake strung over the telephone wire so long it touched the ground on either side. Gossip, well, yes, but as Virginia Hamilton, the great children's author, African-American woman that I treasure dearly, with whom I once had the privilege of having dinner. Virginia once wrote this: "The delicious gossip is the delicious story of our everyday lives. And when those tales are shaped and polished, passed from one hand to the other, they become, in her words, folk tale, or in my words, they simply become story." So there, back home in Indiana, I was sitting at a blessed and rich story table, as I like to call it. And we know that today, sadly, that table is gone from the lives of many of our children. But it's our responsibility that we can begin to recreate that table. My second children's book, Snow Company, recalls a blizzard based on a true story. My father couldn't get, a boy's father couldn't get home. Strangers become stranded near the country homestead. They come up or invited in. The mother puts on a big pot of chili. They sit around the table and they begin to talk. That table becomes that story table, and everyone recounts their past tales and the stories that go with them. Later in that book, after the storm is quieted down and the strangers are all bedded out in the living room, the boy peeks into that living room and he thinks to himself how glad he is, glad for the quiet, for his house, glad that he will have his own story to tell the next time company comes. And so my youth, as I said, was a story time for which I remain grateful. Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk and American poet, once said, "The peculiar grace of a Shaker chair is due to the fact that it was made by someone capable of believing that an angel might come and sit upon it." Well, as I said, my friends, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but that story table, I'm afraid, has gone missing from the lives of many of our children, not only here in West Virginia, but throughout the nation. And so it becomes our call to recreate that table in our schoolrooms, our virtual rooms of any sort of churches, synagogues, and mosques, after-school programs. And we can, drawing upon our own tales of inspiration, upon the skills provided through many of the fine folks joining us here today and the programs they begin to recreate those tables, to nurture storytelling and literacy. There are and have been many people here and throughout West Virginia who believed as much. My predecessors, Irene McKinney and Louise McNeil, my colleagues in children's books in West Virginia and throughout Appalachia, and on I could go, a finer heritage we could not have, all believing that, undeserving as we might seem to ourselves, we nonetheless hold great, if not magical, mysterious, and dare I say it, divine possibilities among us wherever and however we are doing our work to nurture early literacy. We cannot lose sight of that metaphor that Merton gave to us, that sitting upon those chairs in our classrooms and beyond, our children, each one capable of being that angel we would so wish them to be. As I know our state superintendent has liked to say, every child needs one caring adult. To close, Barry Lopez, the great naturalist and writer, has written that everything is held together with stories. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. May you all have a story to tell. May it keep you close. May it change your lives and the lives of the children of West Virginia. And with the help of the wonderful and marvelous West Virginia Public Education Collaborative and the grant support programs for the RFP from the Benedum Foundation, I am sure we can. Many, many thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was very inspirational. And I'm sure that we have some time right now for questions from you. If people have questions in the chat,
So
right
Don,
there.
question came in through email. Mark, could you tell us how we could use technology of today to help nurture the art of storytelling?
How to use the technology of today. Anybody that knows me well will know that I'm a true Luddite and I'm not up on these things, except that I've been giving readings and holding meetings and giving talks through all these various virtual platforms. And I think we have to get over those of us that have fears about such things, and I name myself first, that we can simply carry on virtually for the moment and do it quite well. You know, learning Zoom or I forget the name of our platform here, but you know, these are not, you know, Facebook live streaming. I've used that. These are really much friendlier than one might think. And if you are fearful, which I think may be part of that question, at least for many people would be, simply find someone 20 years younger than yourself and you're home free.
Very good.
Yes, wonderful. Brittany, are you getting any questions? We have a couple comments.
Yes, if somebody could feed me the questions, that would be ideal.
Yes. So just a few comments. Such an inspirational message. It is the stories that build our future. Um, uh, Individuals are chiming in and saying, you know, the stories help hold us together, and they're thanking you for your comments. So inspirational. We have one comment, Mark, it's so good to see you again. I invited you to our Energy Express site in Harrison County a few years ago. I still remember how I felt when you made your talk to the kids. So motivating, so inspiring. Thank you for sharing your stories then and now.
Another great program here in West Virginia is Energy Express.
Yes. And then Sarah chimed in and said, you know, you can look at the West Virginia Public Libraries and how they've transformed their programs to create virtual content. I think that's a great point. I know that some of our senior centers are inviting high school students in. Most of this was before COVID, but to train the seniors on Facebook and social media and how to navigate Google. So there's a lot of partnerships and potential partnerships to explore the use of technology in regards to literacy. Any other questions for Mark?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I really feel I want to hear my fellow panelists. So if there are other questions, perhaps they can come to me later in the program.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Donna.
Okay, our next speaker is Monica Delamay. And she is director. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we can go with Allison. Let's go right there. Our next speaker is Dr. Allison Dagan. She's professor in the College of Education and Human Services at WVU, and she also serves as the program coordinator for the Literacy Education Reading Specialist Program. Her research spans nearly 2 decades and focuses on professional learning and leadership of specialized literacy professionals, such as the classroom teachers and reading specialists, again, which make a very great resource for today and in our RFP process. One thing that's really exciting is she's co-editor of a book, The Best Practices of Literacy Leaders, Key to School Improvement. And I have it right here on my bookshelf that is right behind me. And she's also so well-rounded, you know, fun-loving kind of person that you love to work with. But she is directing right now at WVU the Women's Leadership Initiative, which is a really important one. And we thank her so much for lending her expertise and passion to the creation of our Literacy Initiative RFP, which you'll hear more about from Jim DeNova. But Allison, we're anxious to get the higher education perspective from you and your thoughts. Turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Donna. And right back at you. It is a pleasure to work with you. So here we are. I do wear many hats at West Virginia University, and at the heart is literacy. And that's why I think we're so fortunate to be in a state that is focused on literacy. We've got so many partners across the state, from K-12 schools and higher ed institutions, Department of Ed, community organizations. And what we know is literacy is our life's work. So I'm so proud of this state. I am so proud to be part of this movement. So what I've been asked to talk about today is to share how research informs early literacy success. I'm just going to give you a couple overview variables. And really what we should be seeing in West Virginia early literacy classrooms, pre-K, K1, 2, to develop readers and writers in the later grades. So for background purposes, I will just say in 2002, the National Reading Panel, commissioned by the Department of Education, conducted an analysis of research. And as the story goes, they created the Big Five. I mean, I know that this language is still being used. It's 20 years old. This is still the research that is guiding legislation and policy. But we knew this Big Five was phonemic awareness and phonics and fluency and comprehension and vocabulary. Well, around the same time, around the time of the publication of the National Reading Panel, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, was the creation of the National Early Literacy Panel. So an equally important but lesser known group. And they were also convened by some federal agencies to synthesize the research on early literacy skills birth to 5, found to be central to develop later decoding and oral reading and fluency and reading comprehension and writing and spelling and all the good stuff that we want to see in these classrooms. So the group had identified variables by doing some analysis of existing research for early literacy. And so they came up with 11 variables. I'm just going to share a couple with you. And these, again, are the skills that we know, based on research, do lead to improved reading performance in the later grades. And the first one is alphabetic knowledge. And that is simply the knowledge of the names of the printed letters and the sounds that they make. And I think we can go into any pre-K, K, or first grade classroom, and we're seeing a whole lot of teaching and assessing of this alphabetic knowledge. And, you know, we know that there are 4 ways to determine the knowledge of the letters. And if a child could identify the letter recognize it by its shape, recognize it by the name of the letter, the sound that the letter makes, and are able to write that letter, then we know they know that letter, okay? So alphabetic knowledge is one of the variables. Another variable is phonological awareness, and that's being able to manipulate the sounds in the spoken language. And this includes larger units like syllables and smaller units like phonemes. And a lot of this work is done independent of meaning, and much of it is oral language based. And an example of phonemic awareness, which is the smallest and most discrete of the phonological awareness, would be like taking the word cat. And I would ask a child to replace the ending t sound in cat with the n sound, like the sound that the letter N makes, changing that word from cat to can. And that would be an example of a phonemic awareness exercise to do with beginning readers and writers. A third variable that the National Early Reading Panel found vital is writing, the ability to write letters upon request or to write the child being able to write their own name. And a lot of this has to do with access, and we know this. You know, very sadly, and I think this pandemic has probably brought this to the forefront for those of us who work in schools or have children in schools, you know, access to crayons and markers and chalk and pen and pencils and paper. Well, that's all necessary to develop this the ability to practice writing. Another variable would be concepts of print or concepts of conventions. And very simply, that's knowing how a book works. That's knowing that we read from left to right. We know what the front is. We know what the back is. I laugh whenever I think about conventions of print because this reminds me as why myself as a young reader, I struggled so hard reading out of that Methodist hymnal in church, because I believed that I had knowledge of concept of print from being read to, but I did not know how stanzas work in the printed songbooks that we were reading. So I was always lost in the song. But at any rate, the concepts of print can be developed very simply through shared book readings. And this is at home libraries, school libraries, those adorable little free libraries that people put up. Again, but this is yet another issue of access too, and this is important. Print knowledge is another one of those areas that the National Early Literacy Panel said is very important. And that is taking a combination of knowing about letters, knowing concepts about print, and early decoding. And this can most typically be demonstrated with environmental print. This is why you could see a 2-year-old child walk in and say, read Kroger or McDonald's or Cheerios, because they recognize the shape of this environmental print. The environmental print is really one of the first ways that young children are exposed to the code that makes one understand that the written symbols equal words. And so what we know and research tells us is that by engaging in this environmental print, the kids actually develop what they call a cognitive anchor for mapping the sounds into words. And so this is a great first start. And very lastly, I will say, again, there's 11 variables. I'm just sharing 6 quick with you. I've kind of combined a couple too. It's just oral language conversations. And that's knowing how to produce or comprehend or understand the spoken word. This includes proper use of vocabulary, semantic knowledge, grammar and syntactic knowledge. And we know that young learners can develop this language comprehension by exposure to vocabulary, conversation, books, read alouds, high quality websites and apps as well. And so these are some of the variables and the skills that the research is telling us we should be seeing developed and practiced in birth to 5, birth to 6, 7, and even beyond for some of the kids who would not have had that exposure early on. And so, when thinking about where we are as a state and what we need to do, like I leave you with this thought. So as Donna mentioned, the NAEP results for 4th grade. Last night at 12:01, the NAEP results for 12th grade reading were released. I saw it, heard a bing on my phone, and there it was. And this test has not been given since 2015. It was given in 2019, and really sadly, 12th grade reading scores are down. The scores of boys and students in at-risk groups or populations paint a really sad picture. The reading scores are down 2% since 2015 and down 7% since the NAEP test's inception in 1992. So this is not good news. And what we know is 4th grade news in reading is just as bad across the country and in this state. What NAEP is informing us is that 4 out of 10 4th graders are reading below proficiency. And so if I think about it this way, and again, I like metaphors. Let's say that a school had a budget surplus. Well, no, they wouldn't have a budget surplus. They had a donor, or they won a lottery, or they won a contest. And they put this big 25-foot playground in the backyard, and it had all the bells and whistles. There's a monkey bar and the rock climbing wall and the slide and swings and a climbing rope and all that good stuff. Looks good, a lot of outdoor activity, exercise. But the caveat would be that you would know that 4 out of the 10 kids who are going to play on that jumper, that climber, were going to break their arm. They were going to fall off and break their arm. By the way, an injury that heals, a broken arm heals. So what would we do? Simple. Well, we'd get rid of it, right? We would cash it in. We would buy balls and jump ropes and chalk, and we'd post warnings. You'd have volunteers standing there ready to catch the kids that are going to fall. We'd create options for an artist in residence during lunch or a STEM group. We would keep the kids off that jumper if we thought 4 in 10 were going to get hurt. So what I'm saying here is that 4 in 10 of our kids would get hurt in this climber, we'd do something. So what do we do for the 4 in 10 kids in America, or in this state, the 4 of 10 kids in the state of West Virginia who are reading below basic? Well, simply, we know what to do because research informs us what we should do. And I would suggest practices around immersion and experiences to develop, let's say, alphabetic knowledge, phonological awareness, writing, concepts of print, environmental print, oral language experiences, everything that the research tells us that we should do. And I know you might be thinking, Allison, there's so many more variables and roadblocks and distractions to our work here. And I agree. Sure does make it challenging, doesn't it? All of these barriers. But if indeed this is our life's work, and I struggle using this phrase here because I still don't know if I like this phrase or don't like this phrase, but that phrase, when we know better, we do better. Well, here's the thing. We know better. So that is what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Allison, thank you so much. Very insightful. And we will hold the questions for Allison and the rest of the speakers till the end so that we can kind of pick up some time here. Okay, our next panelist is Monica Delamay. And when I tell you all the jobs she has at the West Virginia Department of Education, you're going to be worn out. But there's our Monica, always smiling, willing to help. She's the director of the Office of Early and Elementary Learning at the department, and she oversees all aspects of West Virginia's comprehensive approach to early and elementary learning system for pre-K through 5, including areas such as school readiness, West Virginia Universal Pre-K, the state's transformational system of support for early literacy. So she is a very busy person, but one who's always accessible to anybody from a classroom teacher to somebody at PEC, Benedum, and beyond. And we appreciate that. She also has had 20 years of experience in the field of early and elementary education as a assessment and school readiness coordinator, child care center director, preschool teacher, and she's an adjunct faculty member of Marshall University. And we're very appreciative to Monica for her help on this initiative and with the RFP and resource guide, and her team and Superintendent Birch. So I'll turn it over to you, Monica.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to be here. And my day is just to share a little bit about the history of the early literacy work that has occurred in West Virginia, based on the research that Allison just shared over what's happened over the past several years with early literacy in our state. So some of you on the meeting may remember that previously, before our current West Virginia code and policy about early literacy was put in place, there was a law that focused on critical skills for 3rd graders and 8th graders. Now, we know that literacy doesn't start in 3rd grade. It doesn't start in kindergarten. It starts at birth. And as a result of the research, as a result of looking at what other states were doing, we worked with our legislature to develop code that was then brought into a state board policy that truly focuses on a comprehensive approach to early literacy for children birth through 3rd grade to work to close the literacy achievement gap in West Virginia. That was in 2014. So the state board policy was approved with this approach in 2015. And then counties actually receive an allocation. Every county has a fully engaged early literacy team at this point in time that focuses on different areas you will learn more about in the resource guide and in the RFP process should you choose to apply. So really listening to Mark Harshman, listening to Allison Dagan talk about language and literacy and a love of learning and this comprehensive approach, we're all speaking the same language here. And there are a lot of efforts that are going on in West Virginia. Of course, we have challenges, extenuating factors. We know that West Virginia leads the nation in opioid deaths of adults, unfortunately. So as Mark mentioned, so many children don't have those tables, don't have those chairs, don't have those laps to sit on. So they don't have language and literacy in their lives. They don't have books at home. And we're working diligently to make sure that children have access to high quality experiences. Our libraries have been a wonderful partner. Hospitals, businesses, everyone is stepping in. And this movement is, it just has such momentum. So when we heard that the PEC and the Benedum interested in helping to supplement this amazing work that's taking place, we were so excited to hear about that, because it really does align very closely with Superintendent Birch's indication of one caring adult and making sure that every child has one caring adult. We know that teachers are amazing, and there are pockets of excellence throughout our state where amazing things are happening. With this grant process, you'll see as you get into the contents of the resource guide and the RFP that you'll have the opportunity to look at innovative practices and what might help transform children into readers, and also to look at how to create a love of learning and a love of language for all children. And that's really what we want. We want to have children who love to learn, who love to read. and we know they'll be more successful in life. We know what the research says about that. Also, we know that our partners on early literacy teams, the Library Commission has been amazing, public libraries, I mentioned that earlier. We're including everyone at the county level, and the way our state code was written and then the state board policy that supports that was written, it's really about local flexibility, because local level teams know far more about the children and families in the communities that they serve than we do at the state level. So we provide a system of support. It's a transformative system of support. Mark mentioned earlier about literacy being transformative. That's actually the title of the legislation, is Transformative System of Support. So that's what we want to have in place. It focuses on areas like school readiness. That includes our universal pre-K program. Received national accolades about that program. We know it makes a difference. Also, it includes extended learning opportunities. So our after-school networks, our Energy Express programs, all those wonderful and amazing partners who bring the resources and expertise about before and after school and summer learning are part of this work. And then, of course, high-quality classroom instruction. And we know that we have several professional development initiatives available that in this year of a pandemic are being delivered somewhat differently with virtual professional learning. But we have a lot of resources that are available, and Maggie hopefully will be able to post some of the links from our website in the chat box. And really, that's just what I wanted to share with you all today, is that this opportunity is a great way to help supplement the work that's going on. We know we have a huge challenge before us. Change takes time, transformation takes time. We have a lot of challenges, but we're well poised to move forward. And the slide is up now with some of the links that you might enjoy. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much. Go ahead. Sarah, did you pop in there? Okay. Really appreciate your comments and finding out all the different aspects of the way the Department of Ed is working with schools and community to improve literacy. Our next speaker is Brandy Turner. She's an early literacy specialist from Marshall University's June Harless Center, and she's working specifically on the campaign for grade level reading. She also works with Dolly Parton's Imagination Library that I think we're all familiar with, that the June Harless Center houses. She has 11 years of experience in the classroom, as well as experience working in the nonprofit sector. And she's also been quite a helpful resource and delight to work with on this RFP process. Brandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to the Alliance for inviting me to be a part of the roundtable. It's truly an honor. I guess my charge here today is just to talk a little bit about the campaign for grade level reading and some of the initiatives that we're doing to support early literacy. I won't take a lot of time. I know we're nearing our time frame here. So the June Harless Center at Marshall was honored to join the efforts of the Department of Education in 2015, actually, to support the campaign for grade level reading. As part of that system of support, the Harless Center has employed 5 of us early literacy specialists to support the work at both the state level and in each of the 55 counties. And so we truly are trying to help the boots on the ground that are working every day to educate our youngest learners. We also recently hired a family support specialist to help bridge that gap that we often see between the school system and the home and make it a more seamless relationship. This work, along with the work that our 2 STEAM pre-K centers do, it really allows us to understand what educators need and how we can support them. And that's really what it's all about with our work, is supporting those who are supporting our learners. I'll just mention a few of our initiatives because I know we're short on time. Donna mentioned the West Virginia Imagination Library Program. In partnership with the department, we help facilitate the awareness building and enrollment and fundraising. So each of the 55 counties can participate in that program in some capacity. If you aren't familiar, make sure you look it up. It's a great program, and we are very happy about the success in our state. We also know and believe that the best way to support our learners is to develop our teachers. And we have found that a strong coach to support the teacher and implementing those best practices that Allison talked about, building their knowledge, reflecting on their lessons, is really helps improve that success rate. So therefore, we host a coaching academy the last several years to support those who are supporting our teachers every day. Our most recent project, and I believe the link was on the previous slide, so that's really exciting. I encourage you to check it out, is the Leaders of Literacy podcast. And this podcast features people across the state who are doing great things, focusing on research and resources around early literacy development. We are excited to say that we have listeners in 11 countries, 25 states, in addition to the District of Columbia. So we really try to keep those very informative and applicable to the work that our educators are doing. I would also just like to end with a few things. I know that here in just a minute, Jim DeNova is going to share a great opportunity with our listeners today. And I would just encourage you to think outside of the box when you are thinking about this RFP and how you might apply to make a difference in early literacy. We know that our state has great partners out there to help with the success. And the two things I would really like to see someone focus on are just helping teachers, again, because we know that they truly are the boots on the ground making the difference. So helping improve their instruction around those foundational skills and comprehension and writing, like Allison mentioned, as well as looking at our families prior to our children entering school and supporting them on how to engage with their children in a developmentally appropriate way so that they can help build those literacy skills as well.
Thank you, Brandy. I appreciate that encouragement for the RFP and to help everybody think about thinking outside the box. That's great. Okay, our last speaker, certainly not least, is Dr. Jim DeNova. And as you know, he's the vice president of the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, and his primary responsibility is for education. And we're all very fortunate to have him in our corner. He's quite an asset, and I always say he's the best critical friend that you'll ever have when you're trying something new in education or you have a big dream. He is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh. He's had years, 35 years, nonprofit administration and in philanthropy. He's on so many boards, I couldn't even recite them all. He's very well sought after. And I am very fortunate to say in the last 4 career positions that I've had, I've worked with Jim on each one of them. And he's always treated me like he's treated everybody, as a friend, but a critical friend. And we appreciate that so much. He's a visionary and an asset to West Virginia. Turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Donna. I would like the audience to know that I'm not stalking Donna through her career. We just had the fortune to work together. I want to thank the panelists. I think we got a ton of information packed into a short period of time. So I want to thank Mark and Allison and Monica and Brandy for sort of laying out the value of early literacy, the theory behind early literacy that will drive improvement, and also the abundance of work that's going on in early literacy in West Virginia. And I think West Virginia educational providers and community providers should be commended for that work. But if we look back to one of Donna's original slides, the United States is not doing very well in terms of literacy among young students, and West Virginia isn't doing very well in terms of preparing our students to be lifelong learners. So what we at Benedum wanted to look at is what is behind those averages, because averages can mask variation and can mask disparity. And we know from some other slides that Donna put up earlier that there's great variation in literacy proficiency in West Virginia schools. They range from 12% in one school to 85% in another. So how can we identify those particular pockets of need where there is greater disparity between low performance and high performance? And by the way, I don't need to tell anyone that COVID is going to make the disparity in educational achievement even greater. So what we wanted to do was try to identify those greatest pockets of need and dig down into why. Back to Allison's approach to understanding where literacy comes in and what some of the approaches ought to be theoretically. So we wanted to drill down and look at specific areas of need and to really identify the kind of interventions that target those specific problems. So it's a very granular diagnostic process, but it's also an effort to try to solicit ideas that match those particular problems. So we turned to PEC. PEC is a great consortium of institutions of higher ed, the K-12 system, the Board of Ed, and all of the participants. Everyone you've heard of today has really been a part of PEC. And so this is the natural agent to actually prepare a request for proposals where we can solicit ideas and proposals that really identify those discrete interventions that attack the great areas of greatest need. So not only is PEC putting out an RFP, which you've heard about repeatedly through the presentation, that will be released today. But I want to add something that I think is more valuable than the request for proposal itself, because we've all seen RFPs. But PEC has prepared a resource guide that's now over 50 pages. And it really is an educational compendium of best practices, evaluation tools, maps, identifying student populations and areas of greatest need in West Virginia. It's a resource tool. It's not a document to be read cover to cover, but it's going to help inform and try to provoke ideas around how we can change practices. As Brandy said, think out of the box. What are some alternative practices that folks have wanted to try but haven't been able to? And we wanted to make some money available that would actually catalyze ideas from frontline educators, early childhood providers, and also academics and researchers. So the request for proposal itself will allow for ideas both in the early stages of life, in school readiness. It'll identify instructional reforms, going back to some of the things that Allison mentioned. It'll be available to community-based providers who are looking for extended day, extended year experiences in the community. So it's not just about third grade reading, it's about all of those stages that build up to it. So that RFP and the resource guide is going to be available now. Now, we're also planning, and you can see a schedule on the screen, I hope, that we wanted to hold some informational sessions. So there's going to be sort of an applicant briefing and a walkthrough of what we're looking for, but also an opportunity to answer questions from the provider community. So there will be one on November 9th. There'll be one or the week of November 9th and the week of November 30th. And these are opportunities to really walk through the process, but also identify some of the key questions that would come up in preparing a proposal. Now, in the notion of preparing a proposal, we are not looking for a competitive process where we're sort of scoring term papers between and among folks. There will definitely be a selection process, but we want to help cultivate ideas. So PEC will be providing a technical assistance panel following these workshops that would really provide some consultation to applicants, prospective applicants, teachers, Head Start administrators and educators, folks that have ideas that they want to cultivate. We will have people available to help them prepare their proposal, to identify some manageable outcomes, to look at the kind of metrics for measurement that would match the intervention that they have in mind. And so we want to really identify those fresh ideas that can match some really pressing problems for those who are suffering the most in terms of academic achievement. So if you look at the schedule, we will be holding information sessions in November. There will be a letter of intent that will be requested by the end of January. And from those letters, we will solicit full proposals, which would come in February. And then hopefully we'll be able to have a set of programs that we can, at Benedum Foundation, would be able to fund early next year. That's the timeline for now. So we're hoping to get proposals and fresh ideas that can address issues of young learners, community-based providers, in-school instructional reform, and hopefully have an array of ideas that we can then support next year. We have an ultimate objective, because we're going to be issuing grants for the 21-22 school year. We're going to do a second round the following year. That could mean newer ideas. That could mean nuanced changes to projects that we fund in 21. And hopefully, at the end of a 3-year process, we will have some reforms that were tested around early literacy that we can take to the legislature, take to the policymaking bodies in West Virginia that could actually then be scaled. So this project is really to identify unique program ideas and then eventually elevate them to something that can benefit all West Virginia students. So I talked quickly. I know we're almost or just out of time, but be happy to answer any questions about the process. There's going to be a mass mailing and invitation to the workshops. So I hope they will be adequately attended.
Thank you so much.
Questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Jim. We are getting a few questions, and we're all extending this conversation to 12:15 to take a few of these questions. One of the questions, can from this grant be combined with other funds to support a larger project?
Yes. In fact, the particulars will be laid out in the RFP, but we're looking for matching funds, and we would welcome a larger project of which we're a part. Now, matching funds can be in kind, they can be a redeployment of internal resources, but absolutely, we would welcome that.
Okay, I have another one as well. Must the funds be used within a certain time frame, or can they be used to support a multi-year project?
The first round will be 1-year grants for the next academic year. The phases of how that is rolled out, though, is something that I would hope would be discussed with one of the technical assistance panels, because we know it is artificial to say that a project can culminate within a year, but there's a possibility that we can look at some benchmarks for future funding. That was kind of a non-answer, but it depends on the particulars of that particular project.
Sure, I understand. Brittany, do we have any questions coming in through email?
I don't see any at this time. Let me take another look here. Make sure.
Sure. Any other panelists want to pipe in? One other question I have, are there certain community organizations with similar goals that would be good partners to reach out to?
That should be reached out to?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. The ultimate objective of reaching competency in third grade literacy means almost everybody shares that goal, whether it's a Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, whether it's a Head Start, whether it's an early childhood program. All of these providers have an element of education that strives to raise literacy levels with the kids that they serve. So there is an automatic shared objective. I want the broadest possible pool of applicants, and that includes libraries. It includes healthcare providers. It can be a broad range. So I would encourage anyone interested. I think the website, PEC has a site to find out more details about the RFP and the schedule and the resource guide. So
Yes.
I would encourage, when in doubt, sign up for one of the workshops. How's that?
And can I throw this out to answer the next question? Because I was looking at the chats too. Someone asked, can we use this funding for summer programs? And you'll see on the RFP that the notification of the award will be April 15th. So I would say the answer to that would be most certainly.
Yes. We would welcome that. Anything that contributes to year-round learning, and I mean, from my personal perspective, that disrupts this part-time educational system we have, where you sort of stop, pause, loop, have summer loss, and then repeat the last session, is sort of a inefficient method of education. It will be worse because of COVID, particularly with kids that have special needs, kids that have been out of the technology loop. There's going to be greater disparity. So summer programming really shores up this sort of fragmented educational schedule we have.
And Jim, this is Monica, had asked Virginia Read Aloud. I just want to let the group know that they are definitely a very important part in our state, and they are of the process. I look forward to continuing to work with them. We all are. Don Schneider, the director, is doing a phenomenal job. But yes, they will be included.
I was
And
thinking
may I
of,
just add and I see that Maggie just put out the RFP link, and I think, and this is really a thank you to WVPEC and the leadership. When I was a committee member, and when the committee first came together last April to start planning this, one of the first decisions was to align the three priorities of this grant with the priorities of the state's campaign for grade level reading. So for those who are on the call, this is not just a K-12 grant. There's an instruction, you as you think about your ideas,
Yes.
You have school readiness as an area that you could focus on, instruction, and extended learning. So the grant proposal, as you'll see it in the RFP, is going to ask you to identify with at least one of those and make a case. So that's why groups like libraries and Read Aloud West Virginia are just as able to apply as first grade teachers.
Yeah. Thank you, Allison. Absolutely.
I was just going to add to second what everyone's saying, a couple of the other organizations that could either be applying or simply be resources for teachers who might apply would be the West Virginia Reading Association. Monica just mentioned West Virginia Read Aloud, the West Virginia Council of Teachers of English. And I noticed that one of the key documents in the resource guide that we had earlier is from the NCTE's 2008 policy brief, Writing Now. Also things like the Retired Principals Association, West Virginia Writers Association. And again, we have one of the finest public library systems in the country for a state as small as ours. So.
Yes. They're incredibly talented people and a lot of resources in West Virginia. So let's figure out how to organize those resources around those young learners who are in greatest need of acceleration in literacy.
Amen.
I was just going to speak up and say that Maggie McDonald, our wonderful program coordinator, has posted the website where the RFP and the resource guide will be found after this virtual roundtable concludes. We thank her for that and all her work, along with our graduate assistant, V.
Let me mention one other thing, since, do we have a few minutes? Are there other questions? Donna, anybody?
No, I don't.
I just want to say, there's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of talent in West Virginia, and there are a lot of things that are working very well in certain communities. How do we transport those kind of programs? How do we figure out how the school that's got an 85% reading proficiency level can help the school that has 12%, or share ideas, create cohorts? Closing the gap. This is the constant message that I keep looking at, and why the maps are so valuable to me, to say where can we go. But there are some things that are really kicking it in West Virginia and working really well. Let's shine a spotlight on those and figure out how to transport those to other areas, and figure out what some of the impediments are.
Very good. Excellent.
I couldn't agree more, Jim. And what an impressive panel today. Thank you so much for your questions. So what's next? Those of you who signed up for today and have registered, we will send a follow-up email, including slides and also including that link to the RFP and the information. And we hope that you will join us again for our next 40 Top conversation on various issues. And I appreciate the West Virginia Public Education Collaborative, Appalachian Power, and the Benedum Foundation for their support today, and all the panelists for really making this an interactive workshop, if you will. Donna, you have any last words?
No, I just want to thank you, Sarah, for the opportunity, and our wonderful panelists. They're just an amazing panel, and all the people like Brittany and Maggie and V that go behind us and help us through all this. Thank you so much, and we look forward to your applications.
Absolutely. And here are information online right now, how to follow the Alliance, how to follow the PEC, and we hope that you join our list and continue the conversation and get those applications in. Thank you so much, everyone. Please stay safe.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Good to be with everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Mark.